Yemen and Oman are two similarly sized neighboring countries in the Arabian Peninsula. You may assume that these two countries are also similar economically, but that's actually the opposite. Yemen, as you may have heard in the news, has been experiencing a bloody civil war and is where a humanitarian catastrophe looms imminent. Also, Ansar Allah, or the Houthis, which is based in Yemen, has turned the Red Sea into an unstable passageway for maritime trade recently. On the other hand, Oman, Yemen's eastern neighbor, is surprisingly stable and doing just fine socially. Why? Why are Yemen and Oman so different? Geography plays a significant factor in the stark contrasts of the two neighboring Arab countries. At a glance, though, both countries are covered with severely arid deserts. There are key differences. Yemen has a slightly higher percentage of arable land, mostly in the western portion, and in theory, could sustain a larger population with more productive agriculture. As a result, Yemen has significantly more people than Oman. Oman, for comparison, just has fewer people, mostly lying around the capital, Muscat. This is because, well, Oman is just almost entirely covered with desert, and much of the population is concentrated over the eastern coastline. Another important factor is oil. Unfortunately, for Yemen, oil is not as abundant as in neighboring Oman, which is not as drastic as Saudi Arabia's or UAE's. However, oil production has significantly contributed to Oman's higher standard of living. Now, geography alone doesn't fully explain why Yemen and Oman are in polar opposite socio-economic conditions. History plays more of it. Both Yemen and Oman have intertwined histories as being the lower, more fertile part of Arabia. But throughout most of their history, the region has been largely underdeveloped and isolated from the rest of the world. There are a few exceptions. The city of Aden in Yemen became a strategic city as it lies near the Bab al-Mandab Strait, which connects the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. The Omani Empire was also a maritime empire that stretched all the way to modern-day Tanzania in Zanzibar. Things changed with the arrival of the British. Both Yemen and Oman fell under British influence, but the northern part of Yemen fell under Turkish rule, beginning Yemen's lengthy divide. Furthermore, Yemen is internally divided between different clans and tribes, which makes national building difficult. After the defeat of the Ottomans in World War I, North Yemen became a kingdom, while South Yemen remained under the British protectorate. The Kingdom of Yemen was a theocratic isolationist state that endured its divided religious and tribal constituents. But things collapsed when a Republican coup overthrew the monarchy in 1962, plunging North Yemen into a gruesome civil war that endured until 1970. Meanwhile, South Yemen continued to be a British protectorate even after World War II, and the smell of independence only began encroaching on British rule, and the rebellion of Arab independence militias forced the Brits to leave Yemen by 1967, establishing the People's Republic of South Yemen. The socialist government in Aden wanted to bring the revolution to North Yemen, which led to direct conflict between the two countries in 1972 and again in 1979. Furthermore, South Yemen became embroiled in its own civil war in 1986, and from that point onward, both North Yemen and South Yemen governments pledged to reunify, which was completed in 1990. You may ask yourself, how would a merger of two nations, which were involved in numerous internal conflicts, work out? Well, the process was delicate, and Yemen's brief stability was fragile due to the North-South divide and the internal sectarian divisions. Things escalated in 1994 when the South tried to reverse the unification, but ultimately failed. Yemen entered a period of fragile stability under the rule of President Ali Abdullah Saleh. But during this period, the seeds of the current civil war would begin in the mid-2000s with the rise of the Houthi movement, where they waged a low-level insurgency against the government. Things turned into a complete downturn with the Arab Spring, which ousted Saleh, and he got replaced by Abdrabbu Mansur Hadi, who was himself forced out into Aden by the Houthis in 2014, sparking the gruesome Yemen civil war. With all these years of constant conflict and division, Yemen never developed substantially and remained poor throughout its history. And the situation today is even more dire, with Yemenis facing one of the greatest humanitarian catastrophes in this world. On the other hand, Oman had a vastly different story. But like Yemen, Oman also experienced periods of conflict. During British protectorate rule, Oman was actually divided somewhat between the Central Sultanate in Muscat and the Imamate of Oman deep within the country. In the 1950s, a rebellion broke out deep within Oman that sought to protect the Imamate of Oman from the central British-backed government in Muscat, although this rebellion was crushed thanks to the mighty British military. In the 1960s, another rebellion broke out, this time in the more distinct Dhofar region near the border with Yemen, which was instigated by left-wing separatists supported by South Yemen. At this point, with the departure of the British, Oman is also a largely underdeveloped country with insurgency problems. So what changed? In 1970, a coup d'etat changed the course of the country. The longtime Sultan Said bin Taimur was ousted by his son, Qaboos bin Said. As a young leader, Qaboos implemented wide-sweeping reforms. He ended slavery, implemented a modernization program that saw a decrease in poverty and an increase in literacy. He also developed its natural resources, abolished his father's harsh restrictions, built its infrastructure, and he successfully suppressed all internal rebellions. Now, he didn't just end the rebellion through brute force. He also implemented civil programs that aimed to make life better for the average citizen in order to win the support of his people. He also oversaw the country's first constitution, and he successfully maintained harmony between the diverse clans and groups within his sultanate. During the Arab Spring, Oman did see protests, but unlike some other leaders, Qaboos responded by cracking down on corrupt ministers, introducing more social welfare programs, and in general, just doubling down on its reforms that aimed to win the support of the people. Furthermore, despite being situated in a contentious geopolitical location, Oman successfully navigated through its foreign policy thanks to the pragmatism of the Sultan. Today, Oman enjoys cordial relationships with its Arab neighbors, with Iran, with the United States, and other regional powers. Oman doesn't burn bridges, and it always wants to act as a mediator to not get caught up in the current geopolitical tensions and to secure its interests. As a result, Oman enjoys a stable and peaceful society, with a relatively high standard of living, not as high as its Gulf neighbors, but just enough to maintain social harmony, in stark contrast to Oman's western neighbor. Of course, Oman is not a perfect state and still faces a lot of woes, whether it's economic, it's too hot, or if you think Oman is just boring. But it is certain that you would rather live in Oman than Yemen. In conclusion, Yemen and Oman may look similar on a map, but are quite different from each other. Up to the 1960s, both Yemen and Oman were actually poor and underdeveloped, but their political circumstances changed their destinies. Yemen just became embroiled in constant civil wars that the country never developed throughout its history, and it is now experiencing some of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. On the other hand, Oman happened to have a leader who genuinely cared about his country's stability and development, and as a result, the country is often regarded as the Switzerland of the Middle East. It is likely that both countries will continue their trajectories as time goes on. Thank you for watching and please subscribe for more country neighbors.